Hello, I'm Kevin Hong. I'm a partner at LYC Partners, an executive search and leadership advisory firm. I'm also the co-founder of The Council, a private network for senior executives. And this is Leaders in Motion. Today, I'm joined by Sonia Benjelloun-Carpentier. Sonia is the managing director of Piaget China, part of the Richmond Group. She spent 2 decades in luxury from De Beers in London and Bulgari in Dubai, and now leading Piaget's operation in Shanghai. Sonia took the helm in China during one of the most turbulent periods in the luxury sector. In this episode, we'll explore what it really takes to bridge the gap between China operations and European headquarters. For Chinese luxury consumers, or unlike any other markets in the world, what leaders needs to get right as the next chapter of the Chinese luxury market unfolds, and what it means to lead as a woman. Sonia, welcome to Leaders in Motion.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here and share a little bit of my experience.
It'd be great if we can know you more and understand a little bit more about your journey, and if you can explain also what brought you to China.
The journey started in Morocco, where I was born and raised, and I had quite a classical path going to study in Paris. But I knew quite early on that I wanted to work in luxury. So I started with, I would say, the temple of marketing, which is L'Oréal, in my very early days. But very quickly, I knew that I wanted to aim for hard luxury. So when I moved to Dubai, we're talking almost 20 years ago, maybe 18 years ago, I started applying to hard luxury roles, watchmaking, jewelry brands. And I landed the role, my first role within LVMH at Tag Heuer. Tag Heuer, pure watch player, of course, very wholesale driven back then and quite masculine brand. It was I would say, the accessible luxury, and yet a fascinating world and universe that was reinforced later on when I moved to London and joined De Beers Jewelry. So De Beers Diamond Jewelers, which is the retail side, which was also part of LVMH back then. Very retail focused, very niche as well, targeting mostly ultra high net worth individuals. And that was probably the best bridge to join afterwards Cartier in their high jewelry departments, which was a fascinating experience because really high jewelry at Cartier is actually, how can I say, the epitome of jewelry, clearly. And that opened doors to different roles afterwards. So Bulgari, still in Middle East, in Dubai. Back then I was already back to Dubai as a marketing and communications director. And afterwards I moved to Piaget as a managing director, first for Middle East, India and Africa, and now for mainland China. So as you can see, the journey clearly oriented towards watches and jewelry, where my passion lies. Definitely due to the appeal of the products, but also of the retail excellence and the long-term vision that these brands and heritage brands are holding and, I would say, guarding for the next generation.
Thank you, Sonia. What differences do you see when you moved to France, London, Dubai, and China?
It does require quite a dose of adaptation, I would say, and of agility to move around. It's good that it happened quite early on, and clearly there are differences between each market. And I think the secret is to stay very open and very humble when moving around. So the challenges are not always where we expect them. So, for instance, I still have a vivid memory of I would not call it a shock, but almost of the shock I had when I was in charge of De Beers in London, and I got promoted and my scope enlarged to France. So I was in charge of marketing and communication for both countries, and you would expect them to be very similar. And yet I did find it quite different because really the British way and the French way are quite different indeed in the way they deal with projects, with deadlines, with budget managements, and so on. So you see sometimes the the surprise is not where you expect it to be. On the other hand, I can say that typically my long experience in the Middle East, which we tend to simplify by calling it the Middle East, but the Middle East regroup a lot of specific countries, which are also very different between them. And that long experience in the region allowed me to have, as I said, an open mind and to be curious about the specificities of each market. And I think that's what made my transition into China quite smooth. It was not because the cultures are very similar, but it was because I learned myself to adapt and to see the non-explicit, to understand the non-explicit, what is the non-said, which is very important in Eastern cultures, generally speaking, as much, I mean, in the Oriental one of the Middle East, as much as the Chinese one. It's really about what is said between the lines. There were some challenges, not necessarily due to the culture of the country, but more about how to convey that culture to your headquarters or how to embed it into your local strategies, because it's very important to find that balance and that relevance to the market.
You mentioned, luckily or fortunately, you moved around very early. Why do you think it is important to do that quite early in your career?
Indeed, it's a good question. Move early in your career because it gives you, once again, that curiosity and that ability to learn. The reality is that when you're young and smart enough to know that you don't know, you're much more adaptable and you're, I would say, keen to learn and then much more open to new cultures. So cultures as in the country culture, but also cultures of enterprises. And so you acquire, it's a skill. It's a skill that needs to be practiced. And you acquire that skill early on, and then you keep it. You keep it with you all your life. And again, like everything else, is by living it, going through it, applying it, that you get better at it. So we all know that people get a little bit more, confident and stubborn as they get older. So it's better to acquire that agility early on.
This is always a question I ask when someone starts to move from functional responsibility, functional leadership to general management level. How was the transition?
There are two aspects to it. One is competence led, and the other is somehow a little bit more random. So the first aspect about the competences and the skills is to develop both left brain and right brain. So if you are in marketing, which was my case, for instance, I started my career in marketing, was very passionate about marketing, and marketing requires a certain set of skills, such as good communication skills, ability to network, creativity somehow. But marketing is not only about that. It's not only about planning beautiful events and signing deals with celebrities, for instance. There is also a whole other aspect that is related purely to business, to sales, to ROI, and that is much more data driven. And that's something that, for instance, is sometimes neglected in marketing roles. And if there is one point on which I can insist is to really, really never dismiss the importance of that correlation between marketing and sales. I know it sounds obvious, but you would be really surprised to see how many marketing leaders, quite senior, are actually very focused and solely focused on their marketing scope instead of understanding the big picture and developing their business acumen by, again, being curious on what's happening, what's driving sales, how is the network built, what is really happening in store, because we're in an industry of retail. So you need to understand what's happening on the field. And you need to talk, to discuss a lot with the boutique teams. So this is one aspect, again, that gets developed over time and over the years, and that you control. The second aspect, a little bit more subtle, is finding people who believe in your potential, not only in your track record, but in your ability to learn. I had that chance And that's how I landed this first managing director role because I applied to this role, and the hiring manager used to be actually my ex-boss, who of course never saw me in that capacity of managing director before, years prior to that interview, but believed in that potential and in my ability to lead a team and in my ability to lead a market. It's also important to, I would say, treasure those relationships and to show your different sides and to not stay too much boxed in your expertise.
Do you think your ability to also understand what was going on into the sales part was something that gave you the opportunity?
Oh, 100%, 100%. And I'm talking about a time, or at least a region where back then it was really the MD roles were given to either commercial profiles or financial profiles. And things are changing right now. So now we're seeing more and more marketing people moving up to MD roles and CA roles, which is a very interesting shift because it shows that the sector has understood the importance also of the brand positioning, brand image, and brand elevation, and those dimensions are essential into driving the longevity of the success of any brand. But someone who's a brand builder who has no understanding or no affinity with the commercial aspect cannot truly succeed in this role. You do need a balance between both. And it's not only about marketing or sales, you also need very strong leadership skills, which, my opinion, might even be the most important one in this kind of role. And you also need to be able to surround yourself with the best person complementing your profile. So nobody is excellent at everything. No leader is an expert of every dimension and aspect of the business. So it is important to gather a team or to build a team of experts and of high achievers who might be better than yourself in certain aspects. So I'm not coming from logistics and supply chain. I'm not coming from finance. So I need a business partner on those in at those conversations. In those conversations, who will be able to share his or her expertise that are obviously much more precious than my own added value on those topics.
Interesting. And coming back now to the relocation as a group, when you've been hired for Piaget as an MD in Dubai, and also I would also ask the same question for China. Any misconception that yourself as a professional or even potentially the group had related to the region?
In our groups, we are very well established since a long time in those markets. So there is a real expertise and a real knowledge of the markets. We, as in the whole luxury sector, has moved away a long time ago from that top-down approach where we just come and push our products. There has been already more than a decade ago a shift of mindset where brands understand the subtleties of each market and personalize their approach and their strategy when entering or when launching new products and new collections. So no, there is no big surprise from a headquarters side, but there are a lot of nuances that happen and that keep happening. I mean, that's how any country and any culture evolves, right? So it's really about keeping them updated on those evolutions of trends, of consumer behavior, of just market shifts that are happening, be it macro or micro trends, and that update is constant. So that would be really the foundation of any relationship between a local market and headquarters, and the foundation for a successful relationship and transparent communication. Now, if I come to my own misconception or surprise when moving around, I would say that I heard for all my career on how China was booming and growing and changing. But it's true that you cannot know China until you live in China. It's just a reality. And no matter how much you hear about it, no matter how much you read about it, you need to experience China to really seize all the scale, the speed, but also the complexity of the market. As I said at the beginning, it's all about the non-said, the non-explicit elements. So I wouldn't say it came as a surprise in the sense that I knew I should expect it. I didn't know what to expect exactly. And I was not disappointed, and I'm still learning every day. Yeah, that's what makes it fun.
Any examples? I'm quite curious to see what you encountered.
Well, I can tell you something that might sound obvious, but again, you need to go through it, and it's very different from the Western way of negotiating. We have a lot of negotiations, and you need to learn and to understand that actually in those very important meetings where big deals are being discussed, sometimes, well, actually quite often, the deal is not going to be concluded around the table, around the meeting room table. And the deal will probably happen and the terms will be finalized later on, either around a good meal and a restaurant, or even in the corridors, or even by the respective teams, and not by the leaders, the bosses. And that's a very interesting way of functioning. That's is again not easy to manage when you're supposed to be in control of your deal and of your negotiation details. And yet you have to accept that it will take longer, and it will take a lot of informal meetings to make it happen. Those meetings are not useless. They're very important because they lay down the foundations of the compromise that each side is going to have to make, because nobody can lose face. And you need to grant something, but you also need to grant, a concession. You cannot walk out of those meetings or post meetings as the 100% winner. So what do you concede and what do you let go of is again a whole different strategic mindset, which you need to build beforehand. So you need to be ready to make certain concessions. It's a whole art. It's an art of negotiation which I particularly enjoy.
I know that you've been to China during a very specific time. It seems like a while ago now, but tell us a little bit about the different crises that you faced in China and how you managed them.
Indeed. So I arrived in 2022, which was still COVID in China, meaning China was still closed to the rest of the world. And like the rest of the world, we had to manage COVID crisis. So adapting constantly calendars, resource allocation, P&L optimization, etc. But I didn't know that COVID would be the easiest part, because after that we had the borders reopening. So borders reopening in a market of big travelers who were waiting for 3 years to go abroad. That meant a real slowdown locally for all luxury brands. And right after that, we had the real estate shock and the market slowed down and the economic crisis that followed. And again, a real estate bubble in China has much more impact than anywhere else in the world because of the percentage of savings of households that go into real estate, and that percentage is much higher than anywhere else in the world. So real estate collapse is particularly worrying for the China consumer. So as I said, it generalized into a more of an economic slowdown. Then we had the trade war. and all the tensions we know. And finally, the Middle East war, which somehow has also an impact, indirect impact on the market and on the consumer confidence. Because at the end, that's what matters most, is the consumer confidence. Whether these events are directly correlated or not to the ability to spend in luxury is almost irrelevant, because it's all about the consumer confidence. So as we know today, the cash savings that are in bank accounts have hit an all-time record, which means that people have not been yet impacted in their personal wealth, but they're feeling much more conservative because they're worried about the future outlook. So navigating this crisis has been once again very enlightening, in the sense that not only we had to adapt to this new normal from a strategic point of view, and really have a laser-focused vision and roadmap for Piaget in China, and making sure we target the right audiences with the right storytelling, and generating not only transactions but actually loyal relationships for the long term. And that's really the difference in our business and in our business model. It's really about building long-term relationships, right? But on the other hand, as a leader, going through this crisis also meant a lot of adaptation required with the teams, because let's put it into context. I'm coming from the West, let's say from Europe and Middle East, where we had known a lot of crisis, regular crisis throughout these last 2 decades. But actually in China, none of my team members had faced any slowdown or any crisis in the past, because this is all very new to China, generally speaking, to the whole market. So it means also finding that balance between supporting your teams, reassuring your teams, and at the same time pushing for a reinvention of the way of working and the way of doing business. So the business used to be much easier, and now it's really about elevating our selling speech, our clienteling skills, the experience we offer to our clients, and the way we portray our brand, right? And that shift of mindsets requires as well a lot of delicacy and a lot of slow pace to really manage this turnaround in a successful way. But we're talking about a market that is all about fast-paced rhythm. So that balance is delicate. And really, I spent a lot of my time trying to finding that balance and trying to really accommodate the needs of my team, to upscale them, to accompany them in that change, yet to also have a sense of urgency when business is down. Clearly, that's when you need to accelerate. That's also an opportunity, right, to grab market shares. And that balance is, it's a very delicate dance.
It's almost like a shift of culture, working culture for your team as well. That's what I also read between the line is it has not been as challenging working or making the headquarter understand the difficult situation. And I believe they have been quite understanding on what was happening on the ground.
We are very lucky to have a few members of our executive committee who are very familiar with China and know very well the market and its complexity. But I just would like to pinpoint that when we talk about educating headquarters about China, it doesn't apply only to top management. It's very, very important to be able to translate the China culture, the China speed, the China ecosystem to all layers of the company, because everyone is a contributor to the strategy of the brand, and everyone is developing either a product or a brand campaign or a retail experience that needs to include some of those Chinese elements. And we need that relationship of trust so that the local teams are empowered. But for the local teams to be empowered, they need to be understood. And they can only understood if we, local teams, share everything very transparently. So it's a two-way avenue two-ways avenue, and it's very important to keep that communication flowing at every level of the organization. Now, obviously, headquarters are, yes, experts of the market and understand the different crises. But obviously, even in a tough market, it is about, as I said, gaining market share or share of mind. So it's also how to transform that challenge into an opportunity that matters.
Maybe you can share some examples of what are the real differences and how, as a company from headquarters and in China team, what were the differences?
The Chinese client is definitely becoming more and more, the Chinese luxury client is becoming more and more mature and sophisticated. And there is an aspect that really Chinese consumers value a lot is heritage and history of those European brands. And they want to dive into our universe and understand better our craftsmanship and so on. This is why we have seen recently a boom, I would say, of brands exhibitions around China, but especially in Shanghai, that invite you to discover their universe. That's something that we wanted to absolutely bring to China. Normally, in the usual process, this type of exhibition is a global initiative, and we're talking about exhibitions that are touring around the world, etc. But again, understanding that sense of urgency and that local appetite for this type of content allowed us to open an exhibition, which we opened last December and lasted until February, to open an exhibition in Shanghai with all the elements, contents, and beautiful creations that we're able to exhibit and share part of our history and of our craftsmanship and storytelling. So that's for me an example of agility of a global brand, a heritage brand, who, in order to answer a local need, has adapted quite quickly and has empowered the local team to express fully the brand image and the brand message at a local level. So that's one of the examples where we had to adapt quickly, but work hand in hand with headquarters in order to bring that vision to life.
How do you see the evolution of the Chinese luxury?
There is a generational gap in China that we don't see anywhere else in the world right now, which is the co-living of 3 generations when it comes to luxury spending. Let me explain that further. You have the first generation of luxury consumers who are the Gen X, so in their 50s, 60s, who build their own wealth and start to experience luxury quite late in life. So they were the ones who were really responding to the logomania, to luxury product as a symbol of their status, of their wealth, of their success. And they wanted to send a message to their world and their entourage through these European heritage brands products. So that's one generation who's still part of our clients' portfolio. Then you have the millennials. So the millennials, they are digital savvy, digital natives for some of them. They're well-traveled, well-educated. They understand luxury, but they really want to go beyond the products. So typically, they're the ones resonating with exhibitions, experiences. They want to understand more about craftsmanship, how it's made, how it's done, where it's produced, and so on. And they're the ones, I would say, that the brand started educating about luxury and who were keen to see the backstage of the luxury world. And then you have the Gen Z, obviously, so that's young generation who usually in most countries of the world are not yet strong luxury buyers, whereas in China they are because they do have the disposable income to buy luxury goods. So they're probably the least loyal type of clients because they want to experience different things. They were born wealthy. They're the first generation to be born wealthy. They're still in their 20s, so it's early to late 20s. And they received luxury experience from their childhood. So they were born in that world. They like following trends, and they are really sensitive to what's trending right now, what is hot right now, and might not be relevant tomorrow. So they're hard to catch. And once you catch them, they're hard to retain as well, because they want relevance, they want purpose, they want experiences. So they're very demanding clients. They buy as much from a store than online, vintage pieces, or Tmall is not a problem. And so they live on multiple channels. So you can see that there are these three generations that are all part of our clients' portfolio. For every brand, the weight of each is going to be different, but you still need, as a brand, to respond to your audience in a consistent way, in a harmonious way. And you still need to be authentic and genuine to your DNA, to your values, etc. So it's really, here again, a game of balance when it comes to your, let's say, marketing strategy or social media strategy, to find the right tone of voice that will appeal, for instance, to the young generation without alienating the older one. And because they're all attracted to your brand for different reasons. So identifying what kind of tone of voice for which touch point is really essential, while keeping a harmonious image and a consistent message throughout.
It's interesting. When it comes to, you mentioned that there has been an impact of the war in the Middle East with the consumer in China. I would like to ask, what do you think was the impact and the effect of that war when it comes to the strategy, like trade war with the US and also the war in the Middle East? What do you think was the impact when it comes to redeploying resources or attention when it comes to China in your case?
There is a clear statement that everyone is making and has agreed on, is that the next China is China. So there will not be a bigger market that is suddenly going to boom and grow in the next decade, other than China and the US, which are the two big markets for luxury. And yes, there is a certain volatility. Yes, it requires adaptation of strategies and resources, but it doesn't mean that China will suddenly be neglected just because of macro events. So China is and will remain at the heart of the strategy of any luxury brand.
There's also a misconception that when it comes to diversity, ESG, and leadership, this is like really much Western value. In the Middle East and even China, there is no such thing. But what do you think? What do you think is the place of women leaders in these regions?
Women empowerment, it's an expression that has been used and abused in the last few years, but it's a necessary, I would say, repetition if we want to see a change actually happen. So women empowerment has clearly been at the heart of my career journey throughout Europe or Middle East and the different countries. To be honest, it has been evolving super fast in Europe, in Middle East, and it has taken a prominent stage. So typically in Europe, I think there is a mandatory balance to reach, typically in board seats, where women should occupy, I believe, 40 to 50% of the board seats, for instance. In leadership position, it's not a question anymore, and it's quite gender balanced as well in Europe. In Middle East, we have seen, I've been a witness of that rise in the UAE first, but also in Saudi Arabia, where so much has happened so fast in the last few years. So very interesting to be in the middle of this change and of this tornado that is very much needed. And we're far at a global level, at a global scale, to have reached equality. But the efforts that have been put into this are admirable. Now, If I go back to your initial question of what surprised me in China, I could have given this as an example. Is when I arrived in China, I was so surprised to see that this was not a topic. It was not at all coming back in conversations, corporate conversations or personal ones. Nobody was really talking about women empowerment. And I wondered why, how come? And yes, if you look at the statistics, it's not like China has reached that gender equality at all. But then I understood. I understood that actually it's not a topic because somehow in the big cities and the big corporations, in the big companies, it's not a topic because the women are already at the table. Women are already leading big companies, medium companies, small companies in China. And it's not a topic because that balance was reached thanks to the one-child policy that gave no other choice than pushing your only child to take over the family business or to be educated abroad and come back and to take on a big corporate role and so on. And it was a surprise, but also a pleasure to get to deal with several top leaders and top executives throughout the market. So typically an example I give often is where we deal a lot with malls and department stores and so on. And many of the managing directors of those malls are women who are very business savvy and are very knowledgeable about their clients, who are in majority, again, female clients. So it makes total sense. And yeah, so there is no such a thing as diversity initiative because there is no such a thing as a diversity problem, at least, and again, I put this caveat out there, at least in the big cities and big companies and in, I would say, in the luxury market. Women are very present, very visible, and it's a pleasure to see this other side of the world through this lens. To be honest, no, and it's very reassuring. So, no, I haven't seen any difference in this position, be it here or in the Middle East. It has been quite smooth. It's not a question. Do we, women, lead differently from men? Yes, probably on some aspects, but both genders have their pros and their cons. There are some stereotypes that are real and valid and others that are complete nonsense. So that lack of specificity linked to gender is actually a breeze of fresh air, I must say. It's reassuring to see that at least in our corporate world, there is no difference. And the teams, whether the teams or the peers or the partners, don't make it a point in our daily business. So no, I haven't seen any difference. I find it reassuring. I know it's not a true fact, and it's not really in every industry or in every country. But I really hope for the world to find the same balance. I feel that in every team, and typically at Piaget it's the case, in every team that is equal from a gender perspective, it brings to the table much healthier debates and good, and it's very solution-driven kind of approach and kind of strategies that are being put in place. Piaget being a good example of that, and I wish that to more brands to experience this balance.
What would be the advice that you would give to young future leaders, women, when it comes to international mobility?
Well, also, if there is one thing I realized throughout my various discussions with young women leaders is that usually the barriers we see are barriers we put ourselves. So those obstacles are not always tangible. We just imagine the worst. We just project our fears, and they rarely become realities. So I would say, yes, if there is one advice, is be more daring. Whether you choose expatriation or not as a career path is a very personal subject and a lot of factors get into it. But if you do have that wish and that dream, then let not fear intercede in your projects. And there is always a way around it. Specifically nowadays, all international groups are very open to that mobility. People are very eager to move around. So don't add to already a very complex environment, don't add imaginary obstacles. That would be my advice.
Sonia, thank you very much. That's very inspiring. And again, thank you for the discussion.
Thank you, Kevin. A pleasure.
Thank you for listening to Leaders in Motion. And if you want to go further, join the Leaders in Motion Academy, our executive program. The first step is simple. Subscribe to our newsletter in the show notes, and you'll get access to our exclusive insights and all the details about the Academy. This podcast is produced by Melanie Hong, who helps leaders and organizations create strategic podcasts. I'm Kevin Hong, and see you next time.